But I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for this very interesting talk. I am Marian Ryanson, the Executive Director of Eating for Your Health by Suppers. And we are a nonprofit that supports people on their journey to learn about cooking and eating in a healthier way and helping them to build a healthy relationship with food. We believe that every person and every body is unique and that there's no single approach to food that's right for everyone. So we encourage people to explore and experiment with food that reflects their taste, budget, background, and culture, and different styles of eating. We don't advocate one single approach to food or way of eating. However, we do emphasize the importance of eating single, whole, fresh ingredients and avoiding processed foods whenever possible. I'm so pleased to have Dr. Benito here again presenting for us. Dr. Benito is our Chief Medical Advisor. Everything that we publish or present has been reviewed and approved by Dr. Benito. Dr. Adi Benito is passionate about educating her patients and giving them practical tools to improve well-being. She's board certified in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism. She attended medical school in Spain and completed residency in internal medicine at Pennsylvania Hospital, the University of Pennsylvania Health System. She has a fellowship in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism at the University of Pennsylvania and fellowship in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona and is a guest faculty. She also studied herbal medicine at the David Winston Center for Herbal Studies, and she's a certified meditation teacher. We are really fortunate to have access to somebody with such knowledge and wisdom as Dr. Benito. So let's get started.
Thank you, Marian, and welcome everyone. So I'm going to talk about cravings. I'm going to try to demystify cravings and try to create some space around them so that if we understand why we get cravings, we can work with them. So why do we get cravings? So part of it is biological, is our biology. So there's part of us that has a circadian rhythm. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about hormones. They do play a role. Some of what we call neurotransmitters, so these chemicals in the brain, such as serotonin. And then there's a part that is actually individuality, genetic, is learned, is also evolutionary, and we'll touch upon that. I'm going to talk about food choices, and that's really where we can actually make some input. We have some input in how we control these cravings. Stress, poor sleep, thirst. I'm not going to talk about thirst more than what I'm saying here, and it's that when you get that signal that you're hungry, sometimes it's not that you're hungry, you're thirsty. Your brain is not going to tell you the difference. So if you're feeling hungry, question yourself, could you be thirsty? And reach for that glass of water before you reach for that piece of food. And as many things, we also have habits or learned behaviors, and cravings could be just part of that. So when we talk about our biology, we're going to talk about each one of those aspects. So the first one is evolution. So through our evolution, food was scarce. So we adapted to getting the most dense nutrients. And because that was what was desirable, eating those foods triggered those pleasure centers in our brain to light up, and it made us seek more of the same foods. Now, food is not scarce anymore. You open your door and you have a couple of food joints. So it's a very different situation, but evolutionary, our brains are just adapted to getting those very dense nutrients and to seek those nutrients again. So that's part of those cravings, that reward mechanism. There's something called hedonic hunger, and that refers to the need to eat even after we've eaten. So that's what we sometimes experience after having dinner. So you finish your dinner and you're like, oh, I would like to eat a little bit of, and you just ate, right? So the foods that lead to more of that hedonic hunger are the following: pizza, chocolate, chips, baked goods, ice cream, fried chicken, buttered popcorn. Apparently the popcorn is not buttered or salty, it doesn't do that. So there are also some chemicals that are called excitotoxins or neurotoxins because they're actually damaging to the brain. And those will trigger your taste buds and make the food taste even better than what food is supposed to taste. And that also makes you want to eat even after you're full. Examples of that is MSG and also aspartame. And you find aspartame in NutraSweet or Equal. And that's, Coke Zero has aspartame. Many other foods that are, no sugar or no calories will have aspartame. So just something to watch for. So I talked about our biology, and part of our biology is the circadian rhythm. And that just is the day-night rhythm that we all have. So this was from a study where they look at 2 cycles. So 4 a.m. to 4 a.m. one day and 4 a.m. to 4 a.m. another day. So what you see here is hunger in this line over here. So what you notice is that at 8 a.m. in the morning, there's very little hunger for these people. But at 8 p.m., they have more hunger. And the same thing happens the next day. 8 a.m., not a lot of hunger. 8 p.m., more hunger. So this internal circadian clock, this day-night clock that we all have, makes us have more hunger, more appetite in the evening. And that's independent of anything else, independent of what foods you've eaten or any other behavior. So there's something that is biological that is going to make you want to eat more at 8 p.m. So just think of that the next time you want to reach for something. Hormones also play a role in cravings. So female hormones such as estradiol or estrogen and progesterone, when you have more estrogen as a woman, that leads to being more full and you have less hunger. When you have low estrogen, that leads to more cravings and you also feel less satisfied after eating. So think of menopause when we lose estrogen, or think of the second part of the cycle. If you're a woman who still gets cycles, you tend to have lower estrogen in that part of the cycle. So that's when you'll be more hungry and you also feel like you're not as full. There are other hormones. One of them is ghrelin, and ghrelin is the hunger hormone. And that goes up in the evening, especially if you don't have enough protein for breakfast. Other hormones, such as insulin, is going to go high. And that's when it goes high, it's going to make us crave more carbohydrates and more sweets. Other hormones, ghrelin, both in men and women, ghrelin is the hunger hormone. It's a hormone that is going to go up in the evening, and it goes up especially if we don't have enough protein for breakfast. Another hormone that is also very important is insulin, because when insulin goes up, it makes us crave more carbohydrates and more sweets. Anything that has sugar is what insulin is going to make you want to have more of. So talking about insulin, this is a really neat study where they had people eat what we call foods that were high in simple carbohydrates or simple sugars and those rapidly digestible carbohydrates, those foods we call high glycemic index. So an example, so simple sugars we all know, right? So sugar or a jam or jelly or free yogurt. Your rapidly digestible carbohydrates are white rice, bread, pasta, bananas, potatoes, right? So they had people eat those, and then also had people eat something with low glycemic, so more fiber, carbohydrates that digest a little bit more slowly into the bloodstream. So just look at the top graph here. So of course, these are the people who have the high glycemic index. This is sugar. See how it goes up. These are people who have low glycemic index. Sugar doesn't go up as much. But what is interesting is the people who had the high glycemic index, not only they went up on their sugar, but as the time went by, they almost went down. About 4 hours later, they got really low or lower in their sugar, lower than they start. However, the ones who had the low glycemic index, the more fiber foods, not only the sugars don't go as high, but they are more steady in the following 4 to 5 hours. If you look at insulin, again, the high glycemic index, as you would imagine, more sugar, more insulin. Not only that, insulin then plummets down, right? After 4 or 5 hours. People who have low glycemic index, insulin doesn't go as high. Now, insulin is important because insulin is a growth hormone. And you and I don't grow tall anymore. We just grow wide. So insulin is what's going to make you put fat when you eat carbohydrates. So it stores carbohydrates as fat, both in your tissues and your organs. So in your liver, around the pancreas, but also around your waist. What was interesting in this study is that they look also at hunger. And people who have the high glycemic index, the ones here, their hunger didn't go down as much. The low glycemic right here had more suppression of hunger. They were less hungry after eating. And their hunger didn't go up as high as those who had the high glycemic glycemic index. So high glycemic index, those foods with a lot of sugar that break down very quickly into the bloodstream, those are going to lead you to more hunger and more insulin production early on. Not only that, but those foods that have a higher glycemic index are going to trigger centers in the brain that are associated with reward and cravings. So everything that lights up here are centers in the brain that want to make you eat more of the same foods. So really interesting how we can control those cravings, lowering those simple carbohydrates. There are neurotransmitters, these chemicals in the brain that send messages or communicate messages. One of them is serotonin. Serotonin, when it's low, is going to stimulate your appetite and it's going to stimulate a desire to eat more carbohydrates. And when you eat carbohydrates, that makes your serotonin to go up, and then that blocks the carbohydrates. So it's a cycle, right? Serotonin makes you feel good. It makes you feel less anxious, less stressed. It makes you sleepy. Interestingly, if you have a food or a meal that has a lot of fat and a lot of protein, that's going to lower serotonin. Okay, so lower serotonin, more cravings for carbohydrates. So high fat, high protein meals will lower serotonin, and that's going to lead to more carbohydrates. So those high protein diets sometimes can lead to more carbohydrates cravings. As you probably know, there are centers in the brain that have to do with that impulse to want to eat more sweets. One of the neurotransmitters that helps you suppress that urge to eat is GABA. Tryptophan is an amino acid, it's part of proteins, and it's a precursor to serotonin. So it comes before serotonin. It's what your body needs to make serotonin. And tryptophan is interesting because even when it's part of proteins, your brain cannot get tryptophan unless you have some carbohydrates with that protein. So eating those carbohydrates will stimulate a bit of insulin, as we saw before, but that allows your body to allow that tryptophan to come into the brain. If you eat a lot of protein, tryptophan cannot come into the brain. And then you cannot make serotonin, and then you crave more carbohydrates. So we talked a bit about food choices. And this is a study looking at simple carbohydrates. When people reduce their simple carbohydrates to a pretty significant degree, this was a very restricted study, and this is the one up here. They gave people 25 grams of carbohydrates per day, and that's pretty restrictive. And they were interested in seeing after 4 weeks what would happen to their cravings. So they look at cravings for fats, for sweets, for starches, for fast food meals, fruits and vegetables, and total cravings. And except for fruits and vegetables, the people, when they go into this low carbohydrate diet, they had less cravings for everything, for fats, for sweets, for starches, this overall fats, and the total cravings. Again, not for fruits and vegetables. That was the same. That didn't change. So it's an interesting concept that if you remove carbohydrates from your diet, you actually decrease cravings. The industry has created these hyperpalatable foods, and those foods are going to trigger dopamine. And dopamine is our feel-good substance. It's another one of the neurotransmitters. At the same time, these foods are going to make you produce other hormones that cause cravings, but also derail the normal signal between the gut and the brain that regulate hunger. So these foods that the industry has created to make them taste good and to make us want to eat more of them are a problem. There are people who actually are more sensitive to these foods, and that's what's genetic. So you could be somebody who is very sensitive to these hyperpalatable foods. And when you get them, you trigger a lot of dopamine, and that wants to or makes you want to eat more of those foods. We talked a little bit about these meals that are rich in carbohydrates, low in protein, because it's going to allow us to get more tryptophan and serotonin. And when we have sugar in excess, that's going to create more hunger, more cravings, and it's going to affect dopamine. And again, because dopamine is a feel-good substance, you want to eat more of those foods. So a lot about our food choices really create then the environment where we get more or fewer cravings. So breakfast is a big one, right? People always say, oh, if you eat breakfast, you're going to feel better. Or if you eat breakfast, you're going to lose weight. Or and the question is, I don't think we really know. I think that there are people for whom breakfast is really important, and people for whom it isn't. This is a study where they look at people who actually had diabetes. And for those with diabetes, it looks like eating breakfast is beneficial. If you don't have breakfast, like the yellow line, you actually end up having more sugar, higher sugars with lunch and dinner. If you have breakfast, sugars don't go as high. So if you are somebody who has diabetes, for you, breakfast is probably important. Again, talking about that, individuality, the bioindividuality, how we are all different. And for some people, something works, somebody doesn't work. Stress is also very important when it comes to appetite. Acute stress will lower appetite. Carbohydrates will make that activation of the stress system also a bit more quiet. It quiets the stress system. So if acute stress lowers appetite, chronic stress is the opposite. Chronic stress is going to release cortisol, that adrenal hormone. That's going to lower dopamine, and that's going to trigger more cravings. Stress is also going to increase ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone. So stress makes you more hungry. Again, chronic stress, not acute, chronic stress. So stress that you carry with day after day after day, or week after week, or month after month. Chronic stress is also going to deplete tryptophan. And when you remember that you need more tryptophan to make serotonin, so that you don't crave carbohydrates. So again, chronic stress is going to make you eat more carbohydrates. And at the same time, stress makes you eat high-calorie foods. There's a desire to eat something that has more fat and more sugar. The sleep, almost as important as stress or lack of stress. When we have poor sleep, that's also going to lead to an imbalance of ghrelin and leptin. So again, ghrelin, your hunger hormone, leptin, a hormone that actually reduces hunger. So in the end, because of that imbalance, poor sleep is going to lead to more overeating, more cravings, especially for those hyperpalatable foods. At the same time, poor sleep is going to impair the brain center of the willpower. And when you don't sleep well, that's definitely going to end in creating more cravings for junk food, especially at night. And that's been studied, and we know exactly where in the brain poor sleep really affects us to want to eat more of those hyperpalatable foods. So now we understand a bit about cravings. We know about the biology, the hormones, the neurotransmitters. We know about different, maybe protein and tryptophan. So how do you stop cravings? How do we do this? So in general, we talk about the food choices, and we've talked about these hedonic foods, these excitotoxins, so MSG, aspartame. Those are the things that you want to avoid because they're going to create more cravings. You want to sleep, you want to rest, you want to exercise, you want to de-stress. That's also going to lower your cravings. Think of drinking water first when you feel that you're hungry. And lastly, you want to bring awareness and spaciousness to those cravings. You want to just take that a little bit more lightly and just create that awareness around the cravings. Don't think about them, so tightly. If you can't, neurofeedback can help. And there's definitely some data that neurofeedback is important if you think that you cannot do that by yourself. So how do we do this? How do we go into each one of these strategies? So food choices. We talked about protein for breakfast. And just remember that a healthy breakfast with a good amount of protein is going to reduce that ghrelin, is going to decrease cravings. It's also going to give you more dopamine. And again, that's only if you're a breakfast eater. If you don't eat breakfast, you could experiment and see whether eating breakfast with a good amount of protein will make you less hungry at night. Do that for a week, see how that works for you. Remember that eating foods that have low glycemic index, so those foods that have more fiber, that don't break as quickly into sugars, will also make you crave less or be less hungry, especially about 4 hours later. So if you always eat, and after eating about 4 hours later, you get this hunger spike, maybe you're eating foods that are too high in the glycemic index, right? You could think about resetting with that restricted carbohydrate diet for 4 weeks. And I put a question mark because I don't think you should do this on your own. You probably want to talk to a nutritionist, dietitian, health coach, a physician, somebody who can help you guide. It's a pretty restricted diet to just eat 25 grams of carbs for 4 weeks. We talked about how having more carbohydrates with a lower protein allows your brain to get that tryptophan that then allows you to make serotonin and lowers carbohydrate cravings. So one option is that you could actually try a vegetarian option for dinner. because that always going to give you lower protein in general, gives you lower protein, a bit more carbohydrates. And then you can think of food as medicine, and we'll talk about foods that lead to create more tryptophan, more dopamine, and more GABA. Let's think about mood. There are other ways that we can also stimulate the reward system. So dopamine, that feel-good substance, gets stimulated when you have social connections. So if you get to the point where you're craving for something, think of another way that you can actually nourish yourself, then it's not through a sweet or salty food. Alkaloids in chocolate will also increase serotonin. So if you're going to eat chocolate, aim for a 70% dark chocolate, so you have less sugar. And you can also ensure that production of serotonin. Again, serotonin is that neurotransmitter, that brain chemical that helps you reduce cravings for carbohydrates. You want to make more serotonin. And you can eat those smart carbohydrates. And I say smart because they don't lead to those high spikes in sugar or insulin. So those are sweet potatoes, apples, blueberries, carrots, oats, and quinoa, legumes, if you tolerate them. You can also eat foods that are rich in tryptophan so that you can make then serotonin. And especially when you're under stress, because under stress, your body's not going to have as much tryptophan. So less tryptophan, less serotonin, more cravings. So figs and plums, tomatoes, milk, soy, and dark chocolate, they all have tryptophan, but you can also make tryptophan by sleeping well, by being exposed to sunlight, and by exercising. And lastly, just watch your mood. Just bring some mindfulness into this craving situation. We can also plan ahead, right? We can trick our system by eating healthy carbohydrates. So you could have a piece of fruit instead of reaching for that donut. You can plan ahead. You can have a few healthy snacks on hand. So one of my favorites is chia seed pudding. And that's because it's going to give you a little bit of that sweet, a little bit of that fat. So it's gonna satiate that craving that you might have. Frozen berries might be good. Yogurt, if you can tolerate either dairy or non-dairy. Nuts, and again, dark chocolate. Remember to have enough tryptophan during stress. And then you can also eat foods that are rich in GABA. And that's again because GABA is going to allow you to have more control in that brain center, that impulse brain center. So foods that are rich in GABA are cruciferous vegetables, peas, especially when they're sprouted, tomatoes, spinach, mushrooms, especially shiitake mushrooms, sprouted grains and beans, especially Atsuki beans, brown rice, oats, barley, and chestnuts. And again, you might not tolerate all those foods, but some of those you probably could, and you can include those in your diet. Fermented foods, kefir, yogurt, miso, tempeh, kombucha, white tea, they all allow you to have more GABA. So you can also use those in your diet. Remember to have a good night's sleep. When you have a lack of sleep, that's going to create more hunger. It's also going to make you want to eat foods that are salty and sweet and starchy. So if you're always reaching for something that is salty or starchy, you might want to think, am I sleeping enough? Do I need more sleep? And exercise also will lower ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and will increase leptin, which is the appetite suppressant. So it goes in the right direction, right? But this happens mostly when you have a prolonged workout or a pretty high intensity workout. So just taking a walk is probably not going to lower ghrelin or increase leptin. Not that it's bad for you to take a walk, but it may not do exactly that. And we talked about this willpower control center, and we talk about how GABA can really help it. But aerobic exercise will also strengthen that willpower in the brain. So this is aerobic exercise. As opposed to strength exercise. And then sleep and rest also strengthen that willpower control center. So I hope that was helpful and that you got some tools that can help you when you get cravings. So thank you, and I'll take any questions.
I have a question about how much is 25 grams of carbs?
Very little. So if you think of a slice of bread, so your good, healthy bread is about 15 grams of carbs. If you think of an apple is already 20 grams of carbs. So we're talking about very little carbs. So you're probably doing some berries and maybe half of or third of a sweet potato. That'd be about it. So it's very, very little carbohydrates.
Okay,
Right.
that's very little.
Yeah, very restricted. That's what I say. Something you should not do on your own. Just have somebody guide you.
Okay. All right. And I feel like I definitely want to put together an infographic with you, Addie, about like, just because I'm like, all right, where do I need to start to stop the process? Right. It's, it's like, okay, if you feel, I think that one of the reasons that cravings are an issue is that you feel out of control. Right.
Right.
So at what
I think I probably start with sleep. I think that if you're not sleeping, you're definitely going to crave more carbohydrates. And if you crave more carbohydrates and you start with that roller coaster of sugar during the day, you're also going to sleep poorly again. And, it's all a whole, vicious cycle. So you need to reset. It's a time to reset. So Karen,
yeah,
sorry,
why are mushrooms different than other mushrooms?
I don't know. That's they're not the white button mushrooms, right? That's like your iceberg lettuce of the mushroom kingdom. So shiitake, they probably have other nutrients, and one of them seems to be GABA. So, likely you can find those easily in the grocery stores. But yeah, no, it's for some reason they have more GABA than other mushrooms.
And I can recommend, if anybody is interested in mushrooms and fungus and fungi, they're on Netflix, I believe. It's The Amazing Fungi. Is that what it is? Isn't that what it's all about? I haven't
seen that one.
I'll send it out to everybody with the link. Everything you ever wanted to know about mushrooms and fungus, but we're afraid to ask. Okay, you mentioned tryptophan. What foods have tryptophan?
So mostly your protein foods. So it's going to be milk, turkey. Everybody talks about turkey for Thanksgiving and how that makes you sleepy, right? Bananas actually have tryptophan. Is one of the few that gives you tryptophan. So it's mostly protein that will give tryptophan. Soy also has some tryptophan. But the thought, and there's actually a really neat study looking at when you eat a lot of protein, thinking that it's going to give you tryptophan. If you don't have enough carbohydrates, tryptophan is not going to go through the brain, because other proteins or parts of protein called amino acids are going to actually block tryptophan from coming into the brain. So you want to have the protein with the carbs to allow tryptophan to go into the brain. So, yes.
Okay. Let's see. Beverly asks, are there any blood tests you would recommend to measure cortisol or ways to measure sleep?
So cortisol is a really hard hormone to measure. I mean, we measure it in endocrinology, and you can measure it in a functional way, but it fluctuates a lot. So it's for what you want to do in terms of getting a sense of whether that's a problem. It's really hard to measure. Not that you can't, but it's just, it's not going to give you the answer that you're looking for. For sleep, sure, you can do a sleep study. A lot of the watches now have, apps that will tell you how many hours you were asleep and how much deep sleep you had and what was REM sleep and all that. So that could be a good tool as well to help you.
Okay. Mimi asks, I usually eat protein at my first meal. I notice when I do not eat protein at dinner, I have trouble falling asleep.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of that tryptophan, that you need that protein to help then, I would imagine, protein with carbs. It could also have to do with sugar regulation, right? If you have protein with something that has sugar, you're going to actually be more steady in how you absorb the sugar. So protein will help your sugars be more steady, which is why people talk about eating protein with every meal if you have a sugar problem. So that could be part of it too, that having that protein also allows you to sleep because your sugars are not as, going up and down.
Okay. Any other questions? A lot to think about.
I mean, I think there's a lot of, in the biology of cravings, crunch cravings. People talk about eating crunchy foods when you're anxious, but do you eat crunch foods because you're anxious? I don't know, right? So it's, the opposite for sure. If you're anxious, instead of reaching for the potato chips, eat some, carrots or celery sticks. that crunching really releases some of that anxiety. So not sure that it goes in the other direction, Terry.
I did read something recently about a good substitute for that crunch is dried garbanzo beans, if you can eat them.
Yes, those are delicious. I roast garbanzo beans, and it's the most delicious thing in the world.
And you can easily season them too.
Yeah, I roast them with some either turmeric or curry or garlic powder. It's just delicious.
Okay. Curious about this willpower control center. Do we have a limited amount?
No, it's
the willpower we need.
No, it's there. It's accessible. I put it there, and that, I actually almost hesitated putting in the slides. I don't think people to think about cravings as just being willpower. I think there's a lot about biology that really makes us want to eat those foods. And, part of it's also the industry making foods. The industry pays people to taste different foods and, see which ones make them want to eat more, right? And those are the ones that they put in the bag. So it's they're playing with the biochemistry. So there's a biochemistry behind this. So yes, there's a part that is willpower. There's a part that is will controlled, and you sleep, you'll have better willpower. But I don't think it's the main part of cravings.
Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions, but this has been really helpful. And we will have the recording available. Somebody says talk about habits like watching TV.
Tell me more about that, Karen. What are you thinking? Oh, watching TV and eating. So being mindless, snacking. Yeah, I think that, it is habit, right? It's like we associate sitting down to watch TV with X, popcorn, glass of wine, whatever. It's just, and it's a habit. And if you get removed from your usual tendencies, that habit might go away. I used to go to these meditation classes with this teacher, and he would say, it's good to break routine. It's good to break routine. And it is good to break routine so that we don't get ingrained in that habit. So it's whatever your brain associates with that time of the night. And you just have to create a new habit. You just have to completely change it so that your brain doesn't associate the same food or the same craving over time. So that's where neurofeedback can also be, I think, helpful for some people.
And I think that's one of the things that we cover in the breakfast challenge and our healthy eating challenge is where being mindful, and when you are eating, making sure that is all you're doing if you can. I mean, so many people eat on the run or eat while they're doing something else, while they're working, while they're watching TV, and they just tend to eat more as a result of that. So that's something that we talk about in those programs. Where can you find people who do neurofeedback? I'm
going to be looking into that, so I'll tell you. I had to actually do that for one of my patients who's having a severe cravings, a young girl who has really significant cravings. So I'm going to be looking into that for her. So okay. I'll let you know what I find out.
We can share that with everybody when we send out the video as well. All right, so I want to thank everybody for joining us. This is wonderful as always, Dr. Benito. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for everybody to know, we are currently running these healthy eating challenges with the Rutgers pharmacy students. And because it is part of a study, it is free of charge. We have 2 sessions that we just opened up for registration, and we'll have 2 more when those are filled up. So if you are up to making some changes in the way that you've been feeding yourself, that's a good way to learn something. Everybody learns something. Often it's not what they expected. So please join us for that. Tomorrow night, I will be delivering a What's in Your Grocery Cart program for the Mercer County library system that is virtual on Zoom, and that's also free. And you can get the link through our website to register for that as well. If there's anybody who wants to just learn about who wants, it's a good jumping point of trying to plan to eat in a healthier way. And it starts when you're shopping, because we know that planning is everything when it comes to healthy eating. So thank you again. And we are also looking for different community partners where we can deliver our presentations. So if you know of any organizations, your churches, synagogues, community centers, senior centers, libraries, we're looking to just share this information with groups as such as this tonight, but also other places where people are willing to open their mind to learning about eating in a healthier way. So thank you for coming, and we will hopefully see you at other programs soon. Oh, we also are probably planning another in-person garden program. So these are things we've got a couple of things in the works. So hope to see you again, and happy eating in a healthy way. And go get those garbanzo beans if you can. All right, everybody. Good night.
Good night.